Guess what time it is? It's time to get started on what's probably going to be the best session of this whole meeting. For those of you who think you might be in the wrong room, this is about the stories we tell, critical insights for advancing community-based climate and health efforts. And my name is Lauren Alexander Augustine. I have the easiest, shortest job of this whole thing. I'm just here to kick you off. I'm like the hype man, right? That's what I am here. I run the Gulf Research Program here at the National Academies. And that means that BP, after breaking all kinds of federal laws, had to pay billions of dollars in settlements, and we got a very small amount of those settlement agreement, about $500 million. And I run that endowment. And the reason that I think I was asked to kick off this session is because our program, as Rob Gasser comes in, who helps run this part of the program at the GRP, we believe strongly in the stories that people tell. And in fact, we invest and we fund stories to be built, created, and then amplified. We do a lot of work around nature-based solutions as part of a healthy community. We do work around compounding disasters that really affect physical and mental health as effects of climate change and changes in weather patterns in the Gulf states. And we also work with partners, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and others, to make sure that people who are collecting health and climate data look like the communities that they're collecting the data from. And so to build this capacity and to be able to tell these stories from the ground up. Even today, in case you guys didn't see it in the New York Times, there's a story about one of our grantees on a nature-based solution. Angela Chalk is in the New York Times about some of the nature-based solutions that she's building to build mental and climate resilience in New Orleans. So we see these stories as like little teeth on a zipper. And the more local the story, like down at the bottom, the way up to Jalonne, who is building these zipper teeth at the very top at the federal level in her former job at the White House. I will close here and hand it off to Jalonne by just saying that these stories that people tell, and in telling these stories, we grow the impact of the work that we're doing. And we grow the ability to be able to share that things do work as we build this resilience to climate and we build the health of our communities as we face these climate challenges. So with this, I'm going to say welcome to our awesome panel. Thank you for coming to the National Academies. Welcome to the House of Science, and Jalonne White-Newsome, who was once formerly of the White House Federal Chief Environmental Justice Officer, and now is running her own program, her own business, empowering a green environment and economy. Jalonne.
Well, thank you so much, Lauren, for the kind introduction and your work. And, you know, she is only 22, but she's been working at the Academy for some time. So appreciate you.
Child labor laws.
Well, you know, let's not talk about that. But first of all, how is everybody? Oh, you got to give me more energy than that. How is everybody? As I will say, we are blessed to be among the living because it could be different. So we cannot take any day, hour, or minute for granted. And so now that Brother Sacoby has come in, we can get this party started. So again, happy Earth Day, everyone. Again, thank you to the leadership of the National Academies, to all of the staff, to all the folks that do the facilities work, that keep us cool when it's hot outside, because I'm from Michigan and I'm not ready for this heat. But thank you for serving us food, all the folks that make this happen. Again, as mentioned, my name is Dr. Jalonne White-Newsome, which is so long. So folks just call me Dr. J. And I have this opportunity to now be on the other side of the federal government, having had the privilege and honor of serving as the first federal chief environmental justice officer with the White House, which was amazing. And now I'm back to my civilian status, running my consulting practice, empowering a green environment and economy, where our mission is to transform communities using people-centered solutions. And I don't just say that as a cute little thing, but it's the way that I operate. And so when I think about this discussion that we're going to have about storytelling and how we're going to advance or have been advancing climate and health, it is so critical right now. And, you know, I think about, because I'm 22 like you, Lauren, but even though my oldest daughter is 19, my story to advance climate and health started way before the White House. It was when I was taking care of my grandparents in their 80s and 90s, and I saw the impact that extreme heat was having on how they functioned every day. It was when my parents on the east side of Detroit were displaced from their home 5 times because of flooding, climate-driven flooding, and the fact that the infrastructure was not enough. And so those impacts due to climate became real personal really quickly. And so as we think about the research, the advocacy, the voices that we have to have in this particular fight, everybody in the physical room and the virtual room is needed to advance, again, storytelling and narratives on climate and health. And so I would imagine, even though I know some of you, but I don't know all of you, each of you have a story to tell. And even if you don't, I hope you leave this room seeking to create the stories that you want to tell. So in fact, I've been able to witness the power of storytelling from my youngest daughter, Jalonne, another J, my little J. And she competes in forensics, which what I thought was like the Law and Order type forensics, they actually have a forensics that is speech and debate. And so her genre is storytelling. And I tell you, she is amazing because her performances have a clear message. They have a story arc. You feel connected to the plot. You are intricately involved, and you watch how the situation changes over time, but ultimately there is a solution. And so when I think about storytelling, it's not only entertaining, right? It is something that we can use to advance the movement, to build bonds, to encourage one another, to create and share models of change, and make clear our roles in this respective climate story that we are building together. So as you listen to our dynamic panelists, both here in person and virtually, I want you to think about, what is your story? What is the story that you want to be able to tell 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when we come back to this summit? And so again, let's kick off this panel. We're going to have each of our dynamic speakers, after I briefly introduce them, they're going to tell a little bit about their story. We have some questions that we've curated to get it, again, get the party started. And then after that, we want to open it up to you all and hear your wisdom and your questions and answers. So does that sound good? Is everybody going to be okay before lunch? All right. All right. So I will start at the end with Blake Ellis. Again, she is the ecotherapy, and I said ecotherapy program manager at Chico State Enterprises. Thank you, Blake, for being here. Dr. Sacoby Wilson is the director of the EJ Lab, and he is also a professor at the University of Maryland, College Park. Mr. Max Cawley is the director of the Climate Research and Engagement at North Carolina's Museum of Life and Science. And last but certainly not least is Eva Hernandez, who is joining us virtually, and she is with the Mosaic Foundation. So with that, Blake, you have the floor, and tell us a little bit about your story.
Hello, everyone. Before I start, no? All right, let's scoot it up. Can you hear me now? All right. I'm going to take a selfie so that I can send this to my mom. Thank you. Let's get going here. Can we start the presentation, please? Thank you so much. So my name is Blake Ellis, and I am the program manager of the Chico State Ecotherapy Program. We provide nature-based mental health services to wildfire-impacted communities in Northern California. I am also an associate clinical social worker and a certified nature and forest therapy guide, and I'm very proudly a Type 2 wildland firefighter. To be clear, I am not in fire suppression, though I became a Type 2 firefighter so that I might understand the context and language and experiences of our firefighter community, and so that I might serve them better, but also so that I could promote and participate in controlled or prescribed burns in our area. So with that, I'll move us right along to my community's story, which for my work truly began on November 8th, 2018, when the deadliest and most destructive wildfire in California history broke out just 7 miles northeast of the town of Paradise. The campfire at its fastest burned an equivalent of 1 football field per second, and in only a matter of hours destroyed the town of Paradise, Concau, Magalia, and it also displaced 30,000 people and claimed 86 lives. After the campfire, I got really involved in mutual aid work and recovery efforts, as well as restoration volunteer work. But that was really my inspiration to go back to school to get my master's in social work so that I could support my community's recovery in a more impactful way. And I was honored to serve at that time as AmeriCorps disaster case manager, supporting folks on their road to recovery. But it's important to note that since the 2018 campfire, my community has experienced, my community in Butte County, California, has experienced multiple catastrophic wildfires since then, including the 2020 North Complex fire, which burned over 300,000 acres and claimed 16 lives. The 2021 Dixie fire, which burned about 1 million acres and claimed 1 life. And then in July of 2024, the Park Fire burned 500,000 acres, which included 98% of the Big Chico Creek Ecological Reserve, where my program is housed. Now, what we know in the aftermath of catastrophic wildfire is that survivors and those impacted have significantly higher rates of post-traumatic stress disorder. And in fact, researchers found that folks impacted by the campfire had rates of PTSD on par with what you would expect to see with war veterans. We also know that there are higher rates of anxiety, depression, and that climate trauma impacts brain function, cognition, and increases substance abuse and a number of other factors, and that all of those impacts are significant in the long term. An understudied impact of catastrophic wildfire is a subsequent long-term and place-based grief that communities experience as a result of that dramatic transformation of landscapes rural communities especially are intimately connected with, a type of grief which I now understand and know as solastalgia. Solastalgia describes the pain and loss of comfort and loss of solace you feel when your beloved place, home environment, and landscapes are negatively transformed. It is the mental, emotional, and spiritual impacts of environmental degradation when cherished home environments are transformed beyond recognition. Solastalgia also encompasses the breakdown of relationships individuals have with their identity, their home, community, and place, and that's combined with a sense of powerlessness. Another understudied impact is how catastrophic affects individuals' sense of place. However, research indicates that individuals with high place attachment also have higher levels of resilience, post-traumatic growth, and lower levels of psychological distress. Individuals with weaker place attachment suffered more psychological distress and depression. And research indicates that community recovery efforts should focus on facilitating healthy place attachments to improve mental health outcomes and build survivors' natural supports and strengths. So the ecotherapy program really began providing nature and forest therapy because the Big Chico Creek Ecological Reserve applied for funding to certify 15 local Butte County community members to become nature and forest therapy guides in order to serve folks impacted by the 2018 campfire and support the trauma healing and transformation, enhance and repair our community's connection to nature and their sense of place. I was fortunate enough to be a member of that cohort of guides and became a nature and forest therapy guide. And so for the last 4 years, we've served wildfire survivors across the state of California. Our program has been discovered by other wildfire and disaster impacted communities in Colorado, Hawaii, Southern California, who've reached out to our program for support and guidance so that they might start similar nature therapy programs in their region. Just to give you a little context for what nature and forest therapy is, this is inspired by the Japanese practice of Shinrin-yoku, which translates to forest bathing. This is a research-based sequence that supports physical, mental, emotional, and social well-being. It promotes stress and trauma recovery, and importantly, can repair our sensory relationship with place and nature, which for wildfire survivors, their sensory relationship with place is often affected with sensory input and data triggering their traumatic experiences, for example, like the smell of smoke or the sound of wind through the trees. The health impacts of nature connection are well documented and well known. What I'm most excited about for nature and forest therapy, however, is that this can promote pro-environmental behavior and protective action, and it can help shift our human-earth relationship to be grounded in care and reciprocity. Our program has participated in a study that was published by PLOS Climate that found that forest therapy can be an effective approach to trauma-informed long-term disaster recovery. And I wanted to share this quote that I think really illustrates how this work is trauma-informed and how it can repair our sensory relationship with place, with a quote from a campfire survivor who shared this during one of my nature and forest therapy sessions. I turn to this quote whenever I am overwhelmed and I need a reminder for why I do this work. She shared, "Today is the first time since the campfire that I have been able to feel the wind on my face and have it be pleasant and pleasurable instead of triggering. I can't tell you how amazing that feels." So when we explore the intersection of climate and health, I think we need to start by reimagining how we think about mental health, especially in the context of disaster impacted communities. When our trauma happens collectively, so should our healing. We can bring communities together to reconnect with the land and to participate in wildfire recovery and restoration efforts. And this sort of approach can not only promote better health outcomes, but can also help rebuild social capital, community, and place connections. The ecotherapy program is taking a transdisciplinary approach and is truly trailblazing at the intersection of social and environmental work. However, funding these initiatives are incredibly difficult as our systems of care and recovery are incredibly siloed, and it can be difficult to convince folks of our innovative approaches. However, our approaches have been able to serve communities and professionals on the front lines of the climate crisis. We've witnessed with great success the impact of our work with wildfire survivors, but also with fire professionals, from firefighters to firelighters in the prescribed and beneficial fire world. We've been able to provide nature therapy to Indigenous communities who find this approach more culturally appropriate. We've also served people in land management and stewardship, which is vital in retaining and supporting this workforce who nearly every year face more challenging wildfire seasons. And due to our connection with Chico State University, we've also provided ecotherapy and climate grief workshops to support college students struggling with climate anxiety and ecological grief. But finally, I think the real point here is that the climate crisis at its heart is a relational crisis. And our approach can help repair the human-earth connection. In the West, we know that we need to increase the number of acres we burn every year in prescribed fire. But how can we expect communities that are traumatized by catastrophic wildfire to implement these solutions? And I believe that in order to keep our communities safe and our ecosystems healthy, we need to provide this kind of work first by providing therapeutic experiences alongside fire and help repair that relationship that these communities have with fire, which is why my program has now started doing pyrotherapy, which combines, we work with our Prescribed Burn Association to provide hands-on learning experiences alongside prescribed fire, as well as a local Indigenous community member from our local tribe to really ground this in the long history of Indigenous communities using beneficial fire to steward these fire-adapted landscapes. And then providing nature therapy alongside this live fire to really repair those sensory connections and provide a social, educational, and therapeutic alongside fire. So with that, that's me. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Blake. Before we move to Dr. Sacoby, it's like church. Do you want to come on in? You good? Oh, no, there's someone standing outside the door. Okay, all right. Max, okay, all right. So thank you, Blake. And again, if we can try to maybe stay between 5 and 6 minutes so we have enough time for Q&A, that would be awesome. So Max, go for it.
Well, I was just about to say, famously, the modality of storytelling takes as long as it's going to take. So there's, there we go. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Yeah, as somebody whose professional preparation is in museums, who have an average visitor age of 8 years old, most of my professional preparation is talking to 8-year-olds. So compared to that, this will be very easy. But truly consider that children especially learn mostly through storytelling, and the vast amount of expertise that exists within education systems to do this modality of storytelling very effectively, and the responsibility that all of us have to invest in those systems. And spend a little bit of time talking about some of our work with this neighborhood that you see behind me. This was taken by a friend of mine, Dr. Donna Myers, who is a public school teacher and a neighborhood leader in this particular neighborhood in Southeast Durham. Donna participated in a program that we co-led with a group in Durham called Communities in Partnership. That was a photo, voice, and oral history project. And we use those two modalities for storytelling because satellite data and mathematical models tell us some of what we understand about the climate crisis. What it doesn't tell you is the human experience on the ground. And for that, you really need to listen to people through their own voice and through their own eyes. On this particular day in Durham, there was a storm. This was not Hurricane Helene. On a September day, some people in Durham experienced a kind of inconvenient rainfall, while others, like Donna here in her neighborhood, experienced what is often referred to in the meteorology community as nuisance flooding. To talk to people on the ground, if you rent your home, your car is your most expensive piece of property. If your car is damaged or destroyed by what is called nuisance flooding, it is not a nuisance to you. This particular event is referred to as PTC 8. Potential Tropical Cyclone 8. It was not a named storm because by a quirk of meteorology, it didn't spin enough, right? But it did drop a significant amount of rain on particular neighborhoods whose infrastructure did not prepare that water to come in and leave really rapidly, causing tens and sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars in property damages across North Carolina. As I said at the beginning of this, because PTC 8 was not a named storm, it not only activated fewer systems for response to the storm, it also means that for most of the world, PTC 8 is not going to be something that we remember for very long, right? Unless you were directly implicated by the storm, unless there is some way for people to tell that story. And in one of the oral histories that we did in this particular neighborhood, I was reminded that had this spun just a little bit more and been a named storm, by the way that we end up naming hurricanes, this would have happened at the letter H in our hurricane season of last year, which means that this would have been named Helene. To understand this, you need to go deeper outside of just climatology or meteorology. You need to understand why some neighborhoods experience this sort of thing in more severe ways than others. And to do that, you need not just a scientific perspective as a siloed discipline, you need history. This right here is the Hayti District, today called the Historic Hayti District, a prosperous, affluent, wealthy, so wealthy of an autonomous Black neighborhood in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s that it was referred to as Durham's Black Wall Street. It was a set of over 300 homes and buildings. If you understand the history of urban renewal in the 1960s and 70s, you know without seeing what the next slide is going to be. Hayti, like many other communities, was slated for a highway. Urban renewal destroyed all but 2 buildings that were never rebuilt. In this neighborhood now, you can still see slates of concrete from over 60 years ago of homes that have never been rebuilt on. You understand by looking at these sets of images, right? The deleterious effects of climate change and health on the people who live here by driving a 8-lane highway through this neighborhood, right? And I don't really even need to show you the climate and weather data, but I will, about how people who live here experience higher heat days, more nuisance or urban flooding events, and are exposed to far higher amounts of particulate matter pollution as a consequence, a direct consequence of exclusionary policies and practices from the 1960s. You can go even further into granular data, getting even closer to perfect information about the micro-scale climatology of these neighborhoods. But no matter how much climate and weather information you have about neighborhoods like Hayti, you still will not understand the lived experience on the ground unless you talk to people there, right? We need both of these modalities because climate data and people's memory are both accurate but incomplete pictures of reality. And for a holistic view of what is actually going on, you need both of them. Unfortunately for us, we tend to privilege or perhaps only use climate data as a way of understanding these things. Here's a picture again of Hayti closer to today. And you can see if we go back that those two buildings that were left are really instructive for lessons for us today. One is the Stanford L. Warren Library, founded as the Durham Colored Library, the first library for Black people in Durham, the second in North Carolina. And the other one there is St. Joseph's AME, today the Hayti Heritage Center. Hayti Heritage Center today is still looked at as being the premier place for people within this neighborhood to come and learn about and steward the past, present, and future of this neighborhood. It is a trusted pillar and institution within this community that is trusted with a lot of this information that you're learning from right now. Now, a piece that I worry about with this type of story is that we often can accidentally give the impression that there was this set of people here and something tragic happened and now they are gone. That is not true. Hayti Heritage Center still is a massive convening center because it is trusted with stewardship of the culture of this specific place and these people throughout time. And when we think about what people want in this neighborhood, that is the place that we can go, the library and the cultural center that are there. And through a project that we ran with them called Imagine Durham 2100, you can go and use ways that people already are engaging with these cultural institutions to understand more about their perspectives, priorities, and policy preferences related to climate change as people with their whole families, right? If you take one thing away from today, what I really hope that you take is that some of the ways that we think about getting ourselves out of the climate crisis are not questions that science alone can or should try to answer, right? Many of these are more closely related to belief systems and values and ethics, which traditionally are also the remit of the humanities and arts. We need to invest in education and cultural institutions to find our way out of this because those are places where people are already engaging very deeply in these conversations about their own perspectives and are places that could be activated as we think more about their priorities of finding their way out of the climate crisis. So think about how to make use of places like the Hayti Heritage Center within your own neighborhoods, because Hayti is a unique neighborhood, but in other ways, there are stories like this one across the United States and organizations like that one that we can learn lessons from stories like this and how to do this work better, to incorporate real, authentic voices of people who are implicated and impacted by climate change. That is all.
Thanks, Max. I hope so.
Steve, I was hitting the green thing. Okay, thanks. Great job that you set me up well. I don't even have to talk. Thanks. Really great stuff. No, so I'm Sacoby. Sorry, this is the second time in 6 years I went to the wrong building. I was talking to a staff person earlier. I'm going to go to the wrong building. I was right. So happy to be here, y'all. Sorry I was late. But really excited just to follow up on the first two speakers. When we think about, so I do a lot of environmental justice work, and you think about climate change impacts us all, but I always have to say is climate change impacts you more if you're Black, Latino, Indigenous, if you are poor, if you live in the floodplain, just getting back to what Max said about, hey, Ty, you go to Princeville, North Carolina, one of the historic Black communities in the state of North Carolina that was impacted by Hurricane Floyd in 1999, right? So this is a freedmen's community that after the flood, they were put in FEMA trailers on top of an old landfill, right? So you think about this intersection of race, place, class, right, hazards, going back with Mark's point about history and culture, and how if you think about the root causes of differential climate impacts, you get back to the root cause when you think about race and racism. So for me, you cannot talk about addressing climate change. You cannot talk about the stories of people impacted by climate change without talking about the stories of folks, this history of this country and where we are now when it comes to racism, when it comes to discrimination, when it comes to the octopus of oppression, whatever arm you're looking at, right? So we're going to address this climate crisis. We have to think about root causes. We're going to address this climate crisis. We have to talk about the stories of people, right? We have to connect our work on climate change to food, to faith, to family, to health, to jobs, right? You think about climate change communication. We've done a great job of talking about doom and gloom. The world's going to end. What did this UN Secretary General say? We gone from global warming to global boiling, 2 years ago? That's true. But communities that I work in every day are already dealing with doom and gloom. The communities I work with, like folks in Buzzard Point, DC, right? For those of you in DC, know about the DC United Soccer Stadium, built on top of that community, historic Black community, right? If you go to Ward 7 and 8, folks are dealing with food injustice, right? They're already dealing with doom and gloom. You go to Baltimore, or as James Brown, I love me some James Brown when I'm gardening, y'all. Baltimore, you go to Baltimore, South Baltimore, Curtis Bay. When it comes to environmental injustice, thinking about technology and tools and storytelling, when we look at mapping environmental injustice in the state of Maryland, it has the worst EJ score that track does than any other tracks in the whole state of Maryland. Why? Because they have more than 70 facilities. Think about stories, y'all, of pollution politics. 70 facilities that are permitted under the Clean Air Act, right? Think about being the toxic trauma of a kid being exposed to those toxins every day. They have the largest medical waste incinerator in the country. They have a trash incinerator, okay? Go to Turner Station. Y'all know y'all history storytelling. Think about Tuskegee, segregation, medical apartheid. Let's go to Henrietta Lacks. Y'all know Henrietta. She's from Turner Station. Dundalk, impacted by the Port of Baltimore, where the ship crash was. Think about the stories, the impacts of that community, right? And everyday exposures for folks. Go to North Carolina. See, good, thank you, Max, because I'm a UNC grad. Go back to North Carolina and think about the stories, Naima Muhammad, Gary Grant, Dolly Burwell, one of the mothers of the environmental justice movement. Go to Naima and Gary Grant, we think about industrial hog farms, right? Those post-slavery Black communities that have more hog farms than any other communities in the state of North Carolina. Come up the road, up 95, to the eastern shore of southern Delaware. For those of you who like to go to the beach, I love Rehoboth Beach. But before you go there, you have a smell. That's chicken farms, y'all. So you think about industrial animal agriculture and its contribution to greenhouse gas emissions and impacts and climate forcing gases, but the impacts every day, the stories of people's lives who have to be exposed to particulate matter, who've been exposed to fecal materials, who've been exposed to hog poo, who've been exposed to chicken poo every day in their well water, in their homes. So when you think about how do we address these issues, why is storytelling important? In this moment, when we think about, not sure how political I can get up here. In this anti-environmental justice, anti-DEI, anti-human rights, anti-people, anti-humanity that we have coming from the current administration, part of the pushback, part of the fight back, part of the get back is the defense, is communication. Telling our stories. Using communication to build power, to grow power, telling our stories using communication to make sure we make that we're helping people connect, as Max said, the climate data to everybody's climate reality, right? What's happening on the ground? Telling our stories so we're not just having good defense, but we're having good offense, right? Telling our stories that young kids know about climate, right? That kids that come from these communities, they're impacted by climate change differentially. You know, this year, y'all, the Pope just passed, right? This year's the 10-year anniversary of the Pope's encyclical. The story impacts as encyclical on people's lives. The Pope didn't talk about climate change encyclical. He talked about the poor. How are we benefiting, impacting, supporting the poor in our work, right? The least of these, right? This year is also the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. There's people who still are struggling 10, 20 years later. The story of New Orleans, the story of the Ninth Ward, right? So how can we make sure that as we are telling these stories, that we're empowering people, right? How we make sure as we're telling these stories, and that's not with an E-M, Dr. J, with an I-N, empowering. Yeah, same thing. So how are we connecting folks to the power that they already have, right? How we can have counter narratives. How can we sing and share our wins and our victories? Because in this moment, people are suffering, right? Whether it be eco-anxiety, climate anxiety, the trauma, toxic trauma, the trauma of the chaos of this current administration and the attacks on everyday folks, everyday Americans, on the American dream and the American experiment, right? What can we do? I think in this moment, we have to make sure, and again, as movement builders, right? For those of us who are movement builders, we need everybody telling these stories, right? So whether it be through photo voice or video voice, citizen science, community science, right? Using apps and technology, using old school journalism, a new school journalism, using social media. We have to have a multimodal approach to communicating our stories, to getting the information out to the audiences we need to get them out to, and making sure we are connecting and bridging, using communication to bridge across difference, bridge across beliefs, bridge across culture in this fight against climate change, right? In this fight for climate justice. So I'm gonna stop talking because I know Dr. J said we 5 to 6 minutes. So thank you, and I will pass the mic.
So I'm just trying to sit with what we've heard so far. And so Eva, before we come to you, I want to remind folks that we will be taking questions from the in-person crowd as well as the virtual crowd. So start to think about the questions you have for our dynamic panelists. Thank you, Dr. Sacoby. Eva, on to you.
Yes, hi. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for having me today. It's such an honor to be here. And sorry I can't be with you in person, but hopefully at the next summit. Eva Hernandez, again, I am with Mosaic, and Mosaic, we're a national grant maker, and we fund our work at an ecosystem level. And so what that means essentially is that we fund across climate, environmental health, and environmental justice. And it's really important for this conversation because we really look holistically at the solutions that we know are really necessary to meet the pace and the scale of the problems that our communities are facing, as my fellow panelists have really done, I think, a great job of articulating. And we know that, we can't divorce environmental health and climate and environmental justice, but that is, in fact, as I'm sure many of you all have experienced, that is how a lot of philanthropy is set up. And so I actually want to share a couple of stories of these really community-based stories of what happens when we break down these silos. So at Mosaic, we're committed to a pretty rigorous monitoring, evaluation, and learning process, because part of our work is to really weave these stories together and to collect the data and to share insights from the field. and to then share that back with the field and also with philanthropy to really demonstrate the power and the impact of this approach. And so I actually really appreciated that challenge from Dr. White-Newsome at the beginning to really think about the stories that we want to be telling at the next summit. So I'm certainly going to be thinking about that. So before coming to Mosaic, I started about a year ago. I came late last year. I was the managing director at the National Sierra Club. I was there for over a decade. And I came to Mosaic because my 20 years working across environmental and climate movement spaces, and I worked at the local level and regional level and national level, I've really seen just time and again that what makes our work effective is what we call movement building infrastructure. And I really think about that as, you know, it's the fabric or the scaffolding of a social movement. And you don't have to take my word for that. I think, you know, we also know just the history of large scale, deep change really shows that social movements are critical to the kind of changes that we need to meet, that we're here to meet. And, you know, I live in Texas. And I cut my teeth really organizing in the South. And I've really always approached this work through an ecosystem-wide lens where climate and conservation, health, justice, they're all deeply interconnected. And, you know, when I think about the work at an ecosystem level, you know, climate change, as we've heard again today, it's affecting people in very real ways every single day, from extreme weather and rising sea levels increasingly and catastrophically, you know, these impacts on our health and well-being. And while we are all affected, as Dr. Wilson pointed out, low-income communities, communities of color are absolutely disproportionately at risk because of the existing social and economic and health vulnerabilities that they're already navigating. And there are actually some really powerful examples of progress at the state level and at the local level. One story that I do want to share is from a local organization here in Austin, and it's an absolute privilege. I sit on their board of directors, and the organization is Go Austin, Vamos Austin, or GAVA for short. And GAVA's mission is to organize and mobilize community power to reduce barriers to health, while also increasing institutional capacity to respond to for people who are most impacted by these historical inequities to respond. And GAVA has a whole number of programs, but I'm actually going to talk a little bit about their climate resiliency work. And this work is hyper-local. And I think because it centers community organizing, it is also very scalable. And it's one of the things I love about, you know, and one of the reasons I spend my time and energy really, you know, on this board. And so GAVA, you know, a number of years ago, actually got funding from Kresge's Climate Change, Health and Equity Initiative. And this grant to GAVA, it was the first of its kind in the city of Austin that I'm aware of. There may be others, but it really went to address these disproportionate impacts of flooding, of heat, of chronic health risks that have been experienced by low-income communities of color in Southeast and in North Central Austin. And over the long term, the goal is for communities for the communities that we work with to be healthy and stable and thriving, but also for residents to trust in local political processes. And so GAVA, when it first started, initially focused on childhood obesity. And they were able to develop this climate resiliency portfolio with Kresge as its first funder, explicitly working on climate. And so this shift required a lot of adaptation, not only for the organization, but also messaging with other funders. And over time, now GAVA has expanded from having one climate resilience funder to 5, and there's a dedicated climate team that's established. And so the work has really transformed GAVA into an organization that's focused on the non-medical drivers of health and climate resilience. And so just a couple ways that we see this come to life, there are a number of climate navigators. So these are residents who are now trained and equipped to anticipate and prepare for and respond to neighborhood shocks and stressors in areas that are most vulnerable to the risks of climate change. And they've also built a number of relationships with city departments. So with the Homeland Security and Emergency Management Department, where they actually have worked with them and continue to work with them on disaster preparedness training workshops. And a big part of that is just like making the jargon about preparedness more accessible. They're partnering and they're guiding the Watershed Protection Department and the Office of Climate Action and Resilience on climate disaster response planning. And the residents have also identified and they've initiated and led efforts to reduce the negative impacts of flood risks and extreme heat and grass fire risks and other climate shocks and stressors that have strained the community health and the ability of the residents to stay in the neighborhood. And one example of that is a local partnership with a local organization called Tree Folks. They're an urban forestry nonprofit here in Austin as well. And they're dedicated to empowering Central Texans to build stronger communities through tree planting. And so through the Climate Navigator program with GAVA and this partnership, they've been able to build out and to build tree ambassadors. And so again, just helping and really building and planting these and participating in these tree planting events in their neighborhoods. And so that's just another very specific example. And because Mosaic is a national grant maker and my work has really been national in scale for the majority of my career, to me, it's been very important to stay grounded in these very local communities. And if we do have time, I'd love to share a couple of examples of some of our grantees who are actually doing really critical work at that intersection of climate and environment. And just one other quick anecdote that I'll share is that we have a participatory grant making process, and we recently closed an open call for concept notes, and we received over 1,000 just under 1,000 applications. And I think this is really indicative of what's happening at a macro level, right? With the largest federal revenue stream for nonprofits that's really closing up right now, the federal government. And so, but what we have when we look at this is an incredible amount of data. And what we're seeing is that the majority, while we fund across issues in this broad tent of environment, of course, the majority of these applications are focused on climate, are focused on environmental health, are focused on environmental justice. And within that, a large number of them are already thinking about and working at this intersection. And so I'll be happy to share more if the opportunity arises. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eva, and giving a shout out to Kresge and all of the funders that are continuing to support the work. I'm gonna just tell you, as a former Kresge employee, we believed in our mission and we still do. And so for funders and those that have resources, continue to do and support the work, regardless of the noise that's happening around us. It is needed. These communities have not changed overnight, and they still need the support and capacity building. So again, I'm thinking just from what I've heard from Blake, Max, Dr. Sacoby, and Eva, I don't think we need any more compelling reasons as to why storytelling is important. We have, again, historical racism that plays into that. We have the fact, again, that we have this relational crisis, as Blake spoke to, when climate happens on us. We have incomplete data sources that don't tell the entire story. And we also have the infrastructures that unfortunately we succumb to sometimes because our institutions are in silos and don't really allow us, or they make it difficult for us to support in a way that's holistic and just makes sense. So from all of the stories and the things that you all shared, my question to you, to this room of NGOs, physicians, scientists, funders, folks that just want to make this world better, what are the tools, the infrastructure, or the resources you think we need to better tell stories that will advance climate and health and justice? What do we need? And anybody can jump in.
I think in rooms like this one, where all of us are going through this like very deep crisis of a huge amount of predictable funding sources very rapidly feeling as though they may go away, it might be invisible that the same is happening in arts, in public institutions, and in humanities. They are also undergoing the exact same thing that is going on in health sciences and environmental justice. One thing that we deeply need is investment in places like public libraries, which historically have been service-oriented and have rapidly rearranged their entire infrastructures to be more in service of the publics that they serve. We can think of our work as being more like libraries, and I think we will all be better off. How can we shift the way that we do our work to be better in service of people? And one of those ways is in investing in education, both formal education and informal. Because of the discriminatory systems by which our society works, right? Like education is often thought of as being women's work. It is the work that has long been societally understood to be done by women, predominantly Black, Indigenous, and women of color. And because of that, society has deemed that that labor often happens often occurs in contexts that are free or very cheap. Because of that, we know the ways that that plays out in things like teacher salaries across the United States. We need to rethink the way that we fund and develop our education systems, both formal and informal. And I have a great opportunity for you. The Hayti Heritage Center, which I mentioned earlier, was founded as that cultural institution 50 years ago this year. If you go to hayti.org, you have an opportunity to fund some of their work for the celebration of the 50-year anniversary of this incredibly vital educational asset in a place that I am from. That's my answer.
I'll add that, as I shared, my community has been impacted by 4 catastrophic wildfires in the last 6 years, and it feels like every new wildfire we experience across the West, we recreate the wheel. And every time we have to figure out things all over again. And so the point was made this morning in our first session, when do lessons observed become lessons learned? And so I think we need this collection. I'm getting calls from folks all over the country and all over the world sometimes. How are you doing this? How is your community recovering? And where does this data go? Where does this information go? So how do we compile this information? How do we share this information? We need the infrastructure. We need the folks creating the playbook, the blueprints, right? The emergency button we can push to really get that information out there. So every disaster we experience, we're not figuring it out all over again for the first time.
Yeah, we need durable infrastructure. And in going back to my point about good offense and good defense, we have to do things differently. Couple things. So Sankofa, get back to basics, right? So thinking about what worked before, bring that back. So one of the things, we have minority serving institutions, right? That do a lot around cultural wellness and actually are in these communities that are at risk of being impacted by climate change. So invest in historically Black colleges. Invest support. You have 12 again for Max. You have more HBCUs in the state of North Carolina than any other state in the country, right? Age-specific institutions, indigenous colleges, right? Invest in those colleges, support those colleges, work those colleges. We need to have cross-sectoral partnerships. Partner with groups you haven't partnered with before, right? Partner with that emergency response infrastructure, right? Partner with the schools, the teachers, and the teachers unions, right? Getting into education. Our kids are the ones being impacted, right? You think about climate anxiety, eco-anxiety, work with the schools. So have these cross-sectoral partner with groups you haven't worked with before, who are on those various front lines. That's important. And let's think about things like education again. We have through my nonprofit, Siege Inc., we have a Climate Justice Fellows program. I think we had like 170 applications. The applications are closed, sorry. But we decided this year we're going to have international. We had a lot of international folks who applied. So we're going to have an international track. It's primarily folks in the Mid-Atlantic, because a lot of my work is in the Mid-Atlantic, but we have a national kind of foci now, non-Mid-Atlantic, and also international track, so we can work across borders, bridge across borders, bridge across difference, bridge across organizations, bridge across sectors. That's why I think it's important for the moment and for the future.
Thank you.
I can
Oh,
just jump in here really quickly. I agree. I think, we at Mosaic, we fund movement infrastructure. That's our primary vehicle for making change. And the day after the elections, I woke up and I just thought, like, we've got to do better talking to a broader swath of the country. And one of our pillars of our grant strategy this year is about building bridges across differences, exactly for the reasons that Dr. Wilson is saying. And when I talk about movement infrastructure, one of our sort of evergreen strategies year over year is about narrative power. And this is really the need for authentic, trusted messengers, right? The people who are telling the stories that really shift the narratives in communities and in regions as well, and really to counter stories that undermine the power of our communities that do exist every single day. And so, there's Angeles Solis is the director of impact at the Innovation Lab, and she says narrative power is about the stories we tell and the questions we ask. And so that question is really important. Whose stories are being told and what are the questions that we're asking?
Thank you so much, Eva. And we know you have a hard stop at 12:45, but I do want to take a moment to move to questions. And I know we have one virtual question, and then the folks in the room, we might be bringing a mic to you. So, or maybe there's a mic over there. So if you want to begin to assemble, if you're physically able to assemble by the microphone, that would be great.
Thank you so much. So I am going to kick us off with our first virtual question. So this is for our panelists. The question is, what types of impacts do you see within the disability community, and how can it be included in planning and response efforts?
Extreme heat has enormous effects on folks that have disabilities, right? One of them being that there are huge implications based on the types of medications that you are taking. But if you think about like some of the real physical disaster level impacts, or some of the things like sunny day flooding or ETC 8, anything that is a minor inconvenience for people that can't leave their home for a few hours has the potential to turn into something massively damaging to somebody who is reliant on predictable transportation systems. That is a particular concern that we hear with folks who have disabilities.
Okay. All right. So we have some folks lined up, so we'll start over here and then we'll alternate. So please state your name, where you're from, and your question.
Can everybody hear me? My name is, can you all hear me? Yes? Okay, louder. All right. My name is Brittany. I'm from El Paso, Texas, from Barrio Chamizal, which is a border community with US and Mexico. So my question, I think, is more directed towards Eva, Texas and stuff, but everybody else, I mean, if anybody else has any suggestions. So just to give a little bit of context on what we do. So we're organizing ourselves with our children. A lot of us are mothers with our children, with our elders in our community, in order to come together and come up with collective solutions to a lot of the issues that we're facing in our community. So we're fighting against the historical neglect of our community and our education and our housing and the multiple sources of contamination in our neighborhood. There's recycling facilities next to our schools. There's a diesel bus hub next to our schools as well. There's been lead found in our playgrounds as well. So despite these living conditions and the language barriers and the digital divide, we've had some tremendous wins in our community. We've been able to advocate for a community center. We've been able to preserve over 300 apartments in our public housing. And then we also have a community garden as well, which are huge wins. So my question for Eva is, despite these wins and despite some of the connections that we have with our local government, a lot of the times when we meet with them, the response tends to be the same. We don't have money. And we know that that's not true. They're currently building a park on top of a highway in a very affluent neighborhood. And for us, because the crisis is so obvious, to us in our neighborhood, we know we need the green infrastructure in our neighborhood. So I guess my question is, what advice do you have as far as like, how do we reach our, specifically, I guess, our local government to seeing these connections and to getting them to invest more in our community? Thank you.
Yeah, it sounds like really powerful work, and it sounds like you all are doing the organizing and really building that power that you need to really influence the decision makers. And you know, I really do think that the GAVA model is one that is really powerful. And I know if you're able to connect with me somehow, you know, I'd be happy to connect you with those folks as well. But you know, one of our grantees is also Alianza Nacional de Campesinas, and you know, it is the campesinas, you know, they're organizing in such powerful ways as well across states. And one of the things that I think is really important is building those alliances across different constituencies, ideologies, and demographics so that there is that unified front and everybody is standing there. You know, you have a unified front when you're standing there asking for those things that are really needed in the community because they benefit everyone. And I think especially, you know, the community gardens, that's something that the Alianza is also really invested in, and because they really serve as these demonstration sites, right, where people are learning about water and soil and conservation and non-toxic pest control methods and how to use natural fertilizers, and they do seed plants and exchanges. And so it could on the surface seem as like this nice to have thing, but it's actually a really powerful vehicle for organizing your community. And so I just want to applaud you for that as well.
Thank you, Eva. So we have about 4 folks in the room and about 7 minutes. So I'm going to ask with love if you could provide your comment or question in about 20 seconds or less, and we can hopefully get through everybody. Thank you. Go for it.
Okay, I'll be quick. Priyanka with the MI Advisors, currently live in LA, but grew up in Florida. My question, so there were a couple of comments, and this has been floating around data. And I think we talked about climate navigators. Blake, obviously you mentioned some of the work that you guys are doing with nature-based therapy and there being social work. So I'd love to know if there are examples of data that is collected that informs care or what you would like to see, and think about screening, diagnosis, treatment, intervention, just really getting the ball moving of crossing these sectors of healthcare, social care, environmental care.
Gosh, that's hard to answer quickly because there's so much. The data around, you know, the health benefits of nature connection are very well documented. And I'm really fortunate to come into this field around the time that there's also a ton of research specifically about forest bathing and how it can help different populations. However, what's understudied is disaster impacted communities and the impact that nature therapy can have specifically in rural communities, but also in the wildland urban interface and in urban communities. How can we utilize our green spaces to promote healing? Our public lands are a source of healing. So I think for me personally, what I would like to see is more data focused on our trauma and how nature therapy can help repair that, how it can help promote pro-environmental behavior, and how it can promote a deeper connection to place and nature. I'll stop there, but I could say a lot more.
Thanks, Blake. We have one more virtual question before we go.
Thank you. This question says, what advice do you have for early career professionals in the climate justice, climate health spaces? How do you specifically recommend learning about community storytelling within the context of climate and health?
Can I jump in?
Go ahead, Eva.
Just 2 very quick responses. One is if you're able to join a board of directors. I have to say, you know, environmental climate justice organizations are always looking for board members. They're looking for young folks to join their board. And it's a really powerful way to meet other folks, but to also just learn about the governance of an organization. And a lot of times boards do have an application process. Green Leadership Trust is a great resource for folks who are looking to join boards of directors. The other I would say is the Climate Advocacy Lab. I don't know if the folks are there in the room, but they are an incredible resource, and they have a membership. For all of their members, they have just an incredible plethora of materials. Membership is free. They just do have a membership base just for, you know, because of some of the, just for proprietary issues and whatnot. But those are two very specific things I'd suggest.
Yeah, there are a number of, you know, frontline, fence line, community-based organizations around the country that you can volunteer. Again, it was just stated, join the board. So we have the Mid-Atlantic Justice Coalition, and the Mid-Atlantic is acronym is MAGIC. Love that name because I came up with it. So MAGIC. We have the Mid-Atlantic Climate Action Hub. So you have a lot of academic centers and non-academic centers that have climate action hubs funded by the Waverly Street Foundation, also Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. So Deep South Center. You have one at the New School in New York. You also have one at Cooney. So you have those centers, and then you have the, you know, CJ, California Environmental Justice Alliance, Michigan Environmental Coalition, the National Climate Justice Alliance, the National Black Environmental Justice Network. You know, you have the North Carolina EJ Network, South Carolina Climate Change Network, South Carolina EJ Network. You got a lot of networks, y'all. So find a network, find a coalition to join. They're out there.
Thank you. I think
if
we need a
it's-
directory of networks. Okay, very quickly, and then I
Yeah.
want to make sure we get to the folks over there.
I've got more of a heart guidance kind of piece of advice, which is to follow what lights you up. Follow what brings you joy. Follow what keeps you up at night. Find people doing that work and follow it to the end. Just keep going. We need people in the world who are doing things that make them come more alive.
Thanks so much, Blake. Okay, on to you.
Hi, I'm Ben Fulgencio Turner. I'm the director of the Climate for Health program at Eco America. So I'm curious on your perspective on anger in storytelling. I do a lot of outreach and engagement on avoid the doom and gloom, positive stories, stories of action. But what is getting me through this moment of not falling into despair is outrage. So I'm curious about your perspective on this. Thank you.
A lot of movements are based in equal measure between rage and outrage at injustice in the past, as well as joy about the possibilities of the future. Both of these are very productive and important emotions to be felt in this moment, and I think both need to be validated.
Yeah, I think as was just stated, anger is something you shouldn't hide from, shouldn't avoid. It should be tapped into and used. And in the words of Mark Ruffalo in Avengers, you know, when he turned into the Hulk, how do you control yourself? I'm always angry. You know, so when it comes to, I'm not quoting the right way, but I'm a Hulk fan. But the point is, you know, as someone who is a Black man in America who's from Mississippi, who experienced the racism as I recognize from age 5 until now, I am constantly angry at the situation of being exposed to this constant racism, but I am not overwhelmed by it. I'm not underwater by it. I use it to drive me, right? But my emotional nutrition to balance the anger comes from working in communities who are fighting for justice. So that's where that balance comes in. That's where my homeostasis comes in. So I'm not out of whack and I don't fall apart. But that's my last point. I'll pass the mic.
If I could quickly add, I think anger often is coming from a deeper emotion, which is our grief and pain of the world. And anger is a mobilizing emotion, and we should absolutely use it to fuel our movements. And grief is a transformative emotion that breaks us open and connects us more deeply. And when we devalue these more difficult emotions, we do our movements and ourselves a disservice.
All right, thank you. Hi, my name is Joanne Perodin. I'm with the Clio Institute. We do a lot of climate advocacy, engagement, and education. And my question is around who tells the story and to whom. So what has been your experience, or what are your recommendations for a community resident who would like to share their personal story when they are engaging with their local churches, or when they're engaging with a neighbor, or when they're engaging with a local elected official.
So you said who should tell the story?
Who to whom?
Who and to whom?
I mean, no, thank you for that. So I think it's important, I do a lot of community-engaged research. I'll just use this as an example from, outreach to community-driven. It should be community-driven. One of the 17 principles of environmental justice, principles 5 is about self-determination. People speak with their own voice. That's the most important principle of the 17 principles. So folks who are most impacted should tell their own stories. I'm not saying I disregard and not a fan of documentaries, but I want to see more citizen, people-driven journalism, right? So putting empowerment, putting the journalistic tools, the storytelling tools in the hands of the people. But it's important for those folks to basically connect to their neighbors, because again, you're gonna, listen to your neighbor more than you listen to somebody who's a stranger. You're gonna listen to your neighbor more than you listen to someone like me who's a talker. I'm an academic, right? But I don't come from these communities, right? I don't live in a community with EJ or climate justice issues. I got a little bit of traffic. I live in Bowie, Maryland. Got a little bit of traffic, right? So who am I? I have some expertise and knowledge, but it's important for people who have the more specificatory knowledge, people the ones on the streets, using street signs and telling those stories to the policymakers, telling those stories in their church, right? Faith-based engagement, y'all, is really important. Work through these infrastructures, activate these infrastructures that now have been active in this space, right? To have that impact. That's why I think that's part of the approach, the kind of pronged approach we need to take when it comes to storytelling.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Okay, go.
I'm so sorry. I think relationships are what change hearts and minds. And we are so incredibly polarized in this country that we've forgotten how to talk to people with different viewpoints as us. And if we're going to actually make change in this world, we're going to have to build power together. We're going to have to find solidarity across class and race, and and across place, right? I love those three. So I think really being able to share our truths and validate other people's emotional experiences while not validating opinions we might not agree with. So I'll stop there.
Okay, so I think this has been touched on a little bit, but another virtual question: how do we demonstrate the value of communicators and storytellers in the local public health departments or environmental protection departments? Give me 1 second. No, you're fine. How do we demonstrate the value of communicators and storytellers in the local public health departments or environmental protection departments?
This is a really good question. It actually ties back to the question earlier about data. Depending on what discipline you are in, particularly social science disciplines, whether or not stories are data is a really muddy and complicated question. But what we do know is that data and stories are both evidence. And in order for them to be sort of at an epistemic balance, right? Like for stories to be at the same level as data, they need to have rigorous documentation at least. One of the biggest pieces of advice I have is to invest in archival infrastructure for this stuff. For people to use it, for it to be usable, you have to be able to find it, and it has to sound good, and it has to have a transcript. That is really challenging labor that is also highly specialized.
Thank you. No, we're gonna go to our last question. I love you, but don't make me act up.
Classical Matley for everything that y'all are sharing. Lil Milagro, I'm with Mycelium Youth Network. We work to prepare young people for climate change. My question is around like the space of radical imagination, because I think a lot in the climate spaces, we get really good about telling the stories of things that have happened to us or that have happened historically to us, and we become less good about being able to vision a world that we want to create. And so it's consistently responding directly to challenges. And so I'm wondering about, in each of your work, the ability, or in one person's work, depending on timing, the ability to create spaces for building like common consensus common consensus around the world that we want to create that's not built on the systems that are currently holding up this world. And so, for example, there's a great quote that says, it's easier to imagine a zombie apocalypse than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. And I think that resonates for a lot of people in terms of failure of imagination. So can you speak to a bit how radical imagination plays in your work and how you're thinking about building larger worlds than this one?
Really briefly, we are not often invited to get to think of ourselves as being part of a community, much less to actually be brought to the table to consider the future of that community. I think that a lot of the stories that we need to tell are histories about the future. And to do that, there are specialized ways that you need to ask questions that allow people not only to consider their own current perspective as being the product and consequences of decisions that people in the past have made, but also that the future is going to be built upon the decisions that we begin to make right now. And people should feel empowered to think about what decisions they can be empowered to make. Those are really interesting questions that we should be asking people to reflect on if we want them to think about what the future looks like and how they can help to shape it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I always talk about, I want to make Wakanda real, Ecotopia is real, right? So that to me is, you need to have arts and humanities in the space to help us. Artivists are really, I think, really important to take us, to help us dream big, dream about something that's different, and not always talk about dystopia and really get to talk these ecotopias, utopias we want to be in, right? So that, I think it's the power of storytelling, right? That when we use storytelling in the right way, we can really lay out that framework. To one of the early questions about, I think the young lady who was on the border, how do you imagine your community when you can be in the comprehensive plan? How should community look in the master plan, right? How should your community look when you have a climate action plan that really emphasizes people, our young folks, emphasizes health, emphasizes equity, emphasizes justice, right? That's visioning, right? So visioning in that way has to be part of this work. And that's why communication and storytelling, I think, it's the glue. And it has to be at the core. And to that last question, it has to be uplifting more than we ever have done in the past. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
So just want to appreciate Eva and all of our panelists. And I have 3 things for you. 1, I want you to take something, right? What did you hear in this session that you can take back to your community and actually operationalize? The second thing, I want you to leave something. Do you know who you're sitting next to? Share a card, connect, because it's about building those unique new partnerships. And the last thing, I want you to tell something. We just talked a lot about storytelling. Again, I'm gonna challenge you. What is the story that you want to tell? And make sure you have that story ready. Again, thank you so much for your time, the extra time and attention. Thank you to our panelists. Let's show them some love.